and a lot of stuff going on. And, it seems like it's gone from uh, quarantine to like locked. I mean, it seems like COVID-19 scare to lockdown to like now there's all this stuff going on in the United States. And it's really emotionally overwhelming. What's weird, and this is I can only speak to my personal experience. I can't speak to how other people are experiencing it, and it doesn't mean that their perspective is no less valid or no less equal to my experience or even more astute in certain ways. Like I'm just going to speak to what my experience is. It's I hesitate to say emotionally overwhelming. um, One of the reasons being is I do feel like emotionally vulnerable, emotionally raw at times. Like there's times that I'll read, like my friend Louise sent me this like 36 believe in humanity things, and there were like pictures of really heartwarming incidents that I'm like, that's really, and I cried, of course, and like I might have cried normally, so it's like who knows, but I assume that because I'm more raw, I was more I was just there to cry, like it's I needed that release kind of thing. Um, And so, but I think what really is affecting me is not necessarily like emotional disappointment, maybe a little fear, a little anxiety, but not really like happy, sad, or whatever it is. Um, but it's more like, oh, do you see that? Did you see that little floaty thing? It's weird. I didn't. Okay. Anyways, um, there's this concept in like the paranormal or metaphysical about orbs and rods and how some they sometimes just appear and it's supposed to be like a spirit or you've caught like an energy or something like that while you're recording. Um, Interesting. But anyways, I don't think it's not really an emotional overload for me. It's something called like I'm sure I've talked about allostatic load, where like every day there's a flip in the narrative. There's a flip in how the world is perceived and how my world is affected. Funny, uh, I posted something a while back that showed police officers taking a knee with protesters, and I was like very positive, like this is what we need to see, and what we need more of. In that instance, what I meant was like I think what we need is a lot of people just to listen to each other, just to empathize with each other. I think that there's my cat Pride. I think that we need law enforcement. We don't need law enforcement. We need humanity. We don't need military. We need community. Like what we need is like people. If law enforcement's going to be there, like protest with them, demonstrate with them. Where the violence comes in is when there's actually an abrasion, when there's like something to be violent against. So that's why you see like the violent protests or the injuries, or you see rioting, because when there's nothing to riot against, the only thing you can equate it to is when people sports teams win and they flip over cars because they're so happy and drunk and like at least like this, there's a purpose to this. But if you had law enforcement show up, you had members of the government show up and empathize and march with or listen to. A lot of this is that people don't feel unheard. Martin Luther King Jr. said, um, writing is the language of the unheard. And I think that's 100% true. And that would be the first solid step towards solving the problem, whereas a military response is only escalating the problem. Because now are you not only saying I'm not going to listen, you're violently saying it. You're saying it with a closed fist, right? So a lot of the stuff is happening in America, and it's happening like in cities where we used to live and whatnot. And it just gets like where I'm at right now is I'm like exhausted. Like I'm just because I'm constantly bringing in new information. Oh, so I'm sorry. I posted something like that where the police officers protesting. So I posted that a little while back. Since then, um, it's come to light that what some law enforcements are doing is they'll kneel with the protester. That way, that gets out, and that's like the image you see of law enforcement. And then after that half hour, then they start tear gassing the crowd to disperse them. That they start off for the soundbite or for the image with this image of let's look at law enforcement empathizing, and then after that's finished, they've gotten the soundbite and they've gotten the promotion. Then they start using means like tear gas is not something that's supposed to be used in war, yet we use it. Americans are using it on their own citizens, right? Or rubber bullets are not supposed to be fired directly at someone's forehead because you could kill someone. That's you're literally firing into the crowd, right? And there's been video footage of people being shot at like 10 feet away with the tear gas guns, like the canisters bouncing off their face or whatever, like that. So like it's and so that's come to light. And my friend posted, on my picture, comment on my picture saying, that one specific picture you pointed 20 minutes later, that's when they started tear gassing the crowd and whatnot. And I responded back and I said, I totally believe that. And that's what I've heard too. But part of me wants to keep this up so that in 5 years or in 10 years, when that memory pops up, or here's some memories to look back on, I can be reminded of why it was so difficult in this time. And one of the reasons was when I posted that picture about the police officers kneeling, that was such like a milestone of maybe the healing is starting, maybe people are starting to see it again. And then by the time that I learned what the truth was or what the narrative was or my friend was, it seemed like weeks had passed. It was only 4 days had passed, maybe 3 days with the time change. But like things change so fast, and they're not small changes. It's not like McDonald's is no longer offering the McRib. These are worldview perspective changes of what we thought America was land of the free, home of the brave. And it's really been shown that it's in the land of the free is being controlled by its military at this point, and it's home of the fearful. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to call out the National Guard or the military. And as many times as people go, "Oh, Trump won't do that," like when the insurgents was when he said he was going to do the insurgents act, people were like, "He's not going to do that. That's impossible." He did it, right? So like all these, oh, that's not going to happen. He's not going to get impeached. He was impeached. Oh, he's not going to block witnesses. He did that. Like all these things have happened, and he's not going to excuse these lawyers that testified. He did all that, right? So I think that a lot of what I'm feeling, a great deal of what I'm feeling, and I hope no one ever has to feel this again in history. But what I want people to do when they look back on this is go like, okay, that gives me more insight as to what's going on. Is this really abstract, hard to explain concept of when your definition of the world is constantly redefined every day, almost twice or three times a day, depending on the information that comes up. It is overwhelming because we're not talking about a very small change to your life. You're talking about a large overall change to your life. Oh, I had to dodge that. My wife had to go upstairs too. We just got back from a run. Because physical exercise is really important right now. It's real physical exercise, eating healthy, taking care of yourself is so important because when you have when you have to adapt to these changes of the way that your world and your childhood and your life has really been defined. And the thing is, if it was one change, like the quarantine, or one change, global pandemic, because those are two different things. A global pandemic is different than the response to the global pandemic. Just the fact that the world can be affected by this pandemic is different than the different than the um than the methods of like quarantine being locked down, because that's the way I'm experiencing it, even though like I can be a part of history. That's something. So those are two different things. But on top of that, then you have like the what's happening in the United States. So these aren't small minor things. These are like large global definitions. And if you get changes, and the thing is, if you get changes like multiple times a day, your mind is constantly trying to adapt to these different things. So you get overwhelmed because it's imagine if there's a tree and the tree has roots that dig into the ground and the tree has branches that stick in the ground, right? And these core experiences or definitions or gestalts that we have, if they're modified two or three sometimes a day, imagine if you had to change the trunk of that tree two or three times a day, because these core concepts affect so many other concepts in your life, affect so many other elements in your life. So a plant does not survive if you have to change the trunk every day, every twice a day. Or imagine if you had to change your rib cage two or three times a day, or your spine two or three times a day. Like these are core definitions of the world and how we perceive them and how it affects our world. So it gets exhausting and it gets like overwhelming. And so I experienced this state of like exhaustion, and not like there's an emotional component, sure, but it's more like a focus component. It's like I've spent so much time thinking about the definition of the world that now I need to watch SpongeBob SquarePants. I mean, I don't. That's just an example. But like, I need to do this thing that's the opposite, where my mind can have times to process what's going on, and I don't have to think so much. So that's what I wanted to put out there. Is there's just so much stuff going on, and I sympathize and I empathize with people who are having similar issues of being overloaded. I'm sure that you also have different issues of like violence. People are directly experiencing violence, or the fear of rioting happening on their doorstep, or there's so much other stuff going on, or their own family members defending it. Like there's so much stuff going on that I empathize with the sensation. I can't empathize with everything you're going through because I don't know your perspective. I don't walk in your shoes, but I can empathize with the sensation of feeling overwhelmed by it all. That's what I empathize with. So I hope in future generations, when they study this time period, that they look at it and they go, why didn't you do more? Or they look at it and go, what was the overall sensation of people around the world? Because I'm far removed from the United States. I'm over in England. So I don't know, I can't directly affect that. I can indirectly affect it with like social media and the way I can communicate with people. But it's so far, when people look back on us, like people look back during this time, because people are going to study this time, that they realize that a large portion of the the challenge, I guess the challenge is having daily modifications to your core values. It's really strange. And I will say that one of the things that I think has really helped me through this is having a circle of friends. Because there is a lot of judgment about people saying, I'm going to unfollow people that don't think like me or piss me off. And then they think it's a negative value to have an echo chamber. I don't think so. I think that my life would be way more exhausting if I didn't have a circle of friends and I didn't remove those people or I didn't speak up for myself. Because just like in everyday life, you're going to choose to hang out with certain people. I'm going to hang out with my friend, right? I'm not going to hang out with people that I dislike or piss me off. I'm not going to go to parties where they're at. I'm not going to seek out forums where I get to hear their point of view. I know they exist, but I'm not going to seek out forums with people that aggravate me or have different points of view or who points of view or activity might literally threaten my happiness, right? I think it's totally fine on Facebook and Twitter and all these social medias to develop. There's my cat again. To develop a circle of friends like you would in everyday life, and I think that's so important and so valid. And because then it makes me also feel supported. That when I go on social media, I'm not hearing about. I'm not being defeated by people that I don't agree with in the first place, like that I know I didn't agree with, but so I think that's really helping me out. I think that really helps out emotionally. Um, and it's strange because I think a majority of people, the news that they trust the most is the news that's been regurgitated by their friends and family, the news that's been chomped up a little bit and then kind of filtered out to them a little bit because so many news sources or news entertainment like Fox News are so unreliable and so biased and they have an agenda. Like it's so weird. It's such a different time right now. It's such a crazy time right now. I I I think that we will get through this, and I think there's light on the other end of the tunnel. And I'm so sorry to say that I hope the children that exist now save us from the quagmire that we find ourselves in. I think a portion of it is not really my generations or younger generations. I think it's the generation above us who wanted to keep a system the exact same, even though the world was evolving at a much faster rate. So, like an economy where like you work 9 to 5 jobs 5 days a week, even though, and then like the amount of income generated was not raising to meet the amount of rent that was increased or the price increase in food or whatever, and that people were working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And at one time, you could have one job and own a home, and it's just not the same way it once was. So I think that the world is, and then the evolution of social media uniting the world together, and how we have these entities like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who are just billionaires, which is completely unnecessary. And that's an evolution. And I think previous generations don't think further than what they experienced when they were younger. Instead of thinking of what's happening right now. This is what's happening. Here's the technology that exists right now. Here's the impact of what's happening right now. So I just hope future generations can invoke the change that we had a very difficult time of doing, because a lot of times people like my generations. So here's one reason I say that is people in generations above me have managerial positions, have leadership positions, have director positions, and they're not leaving because they're making tons of good money because their income, because they can vote for each other to get raises. But they're not leaving those positions where back in the past they would have moved out and other people would have moved in and it would have kept like this constant evolution going. It's not happening so much anymore. So people in leadership positions to make decisions, their opinion and their thought process, their ideology is not evolving as fast as the world is. But then also they're not being refreshed with new thought as well by having newer people in those positions and decision making positions. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. But like I said before, I do think that there's light at the other end of this. I can just feel it in my heart. I do think so.